plants communicate with one another with hormones. Plants communicate internally amongst cells with hormones. They probably can also communicate with other plants through hormones, but we're interested in hormones being released from a plant. It will be received. There's a reception of the hormone. And then there's a transduction. Do you remember learning about transduction in this class before? We already covered it.
Yes.
Remember all the molecules that interact with one another to make kind of a chain reaction inside the cell? Remember we had magnets for that? Wasn't it fun?
It's so fun.
So there's a reception of the hormone, there's a transduction, and then there's some response. The cell will respond to it. Plant cells do this just the same, well, not exactly the same, but similarly to animal cells and other types of cells. Whoa. Now, let's see some of the hormones. There are 3 types of growth hormones in plants, and in your reading there's a paragraph about each one of these types of hormones. So make sure you read about it. But all 3 of these are growth hormones. It causes plants to grow more. Auxins, Gibberellins, and cytokinins. Now, do you remember the word cytokinesis?
Yep.
So, what is cytokinesis?
With cell division.
Cell division, right? That's what cytokinins cause. Cells to rapidly divide. And if you have more cells, you're probably growing bigger.
Is that what? Never mind.
What?
Never mind.
No? I will never mind them. Never. Auxins and Gibberellins. Auxins tend to cause cells to elongate, to get longer. And Gibberellins have a number of effects. Gibberellins will cause fruits to get bigger. Big, giant grapes. You like big grapes? Or do you like little grapes? You like big grapes. I'll go ahead and answer that for you. You put Gibberellins on your grapes, they're going to get, on your grape vines, they're going to grow bigger grapes. Let's take a look real quickly at how auxins work. You don't have to know how each of these work, but auxins is kind of interesting. Oh, look. Plant with auxins, plant without auxins. Oh, have you ever heard of the Fritz-Wendt experiment?
No.
Check this out. This is a seed he planted. I think he used ryegrass seeds. Anyway, the plant's coming up like this. He cuts the top of it off. It's called the coleoptile. And he does that with a bunch of them. He puts these tips onto a block of agar. Y'all know what agar is, right? It's what the bacteria grow on.
Yes.
Are y'all following this? Josie, this is an unbelievable experiment. It won him the Nobel Prize. And all the hormones that were in the tip leaked into the agar. And, of course, the tip of the plant is growing, so these are growth hormones. He then took a cube of the agar, he cut out a little cube of it, and he put it on one side of the plant. And that plant bent. So he figured there were growth hormones causing the one side where he put the agar block to grow. Imagine if you just put growth hormone on my right side. This side would grow longer, and this side would stay the same, and I'd end up leaning over this way. And they'd say, "What's wrong?" I'd go, "Auxin." And they'd go up. Okay, maybe that scenario wouldn't happen, because I'm not a plant. But if I was, isn't that a great experiment?
Heck yes.
Fritz-Wendt.
Fritz-Wendt where?
Where'd he go?
I don't know. To the store to get more seeds. So here's how this hormone works. The auxin is a hormone. It binds to a protein that's on the surface of the cell, and that protein pumps hydrogen ions out of the cell. Do you know what an area that has a whole bunch of hydrogen ions is said to be?
Either acidic or basic.
It's one of the two.
Acidic.
It's acidic. And so this whole area where if the auxin causes hydrogen to be pumped out, and this whole area outside the cell becomes acidic. And that acid causes the cell wall to break and fracture. And the cell wall becomes fractured. And when the cell wall becomes fractured, there's nothing holding the shape of it, and it stretches. That's why the plant who's got auxin released on this side, all the cells stretched and got longer. Would you like to see the stretching of plant cells in action? Video footage?
Heck yeah.
Oh, hey, look. Here's a plant with gibberellins. No gibberellins. Gibberellins? No gibberellins.
Big great.
Come here. What? Oh, you can come back.
Oh, was that what you making eye contact
Yeah, I was
with
like,
me?
grow up.
I thought
Sorry,
you
I
were
forgot
just
about
class.
We're talking about 23.6 plant hormone. Now, what about growth inhibiting hormones? Abscisic acid and ethylene, they stop growth of plants. Abscisic acid causes the stomates to close. Do y'all remember my hand puppet Stomie?
Heck yeah.
Hi, science fair next week, yay! You could do an experiment where you count me.
I forgot
You
his
can count
eyes.
stomates in different plants. Do you think there's more stomates in plants that live in the shade or plants that live in the sunlight?
Sun.
That could be your experiment. I don't know. Maybe it's the same. So, abscisic acid causes the stomates to close. If the stomates are closed up, the plant can't take in carbon dioxide. And so it won't do photosynthesis, and it won't grow. Isn't that cool? Abscisic acid. And ethylene is a gaseous hormone. And it causes fruits to ripen. And it causes
What?
it causes leaves to fall. Have you ever noticed in the fall the leaves all fall off the tree?
Really?
About the same time? You ever notice that? That's caused by a gas called ethylene. Here's a bunch of trees dropping leaves.
I'm great.
Hey, check this out. Here is a holly stem just sitting in a beaker of water, minding its own business, being happy. And in this experiment, they put an apple inside the beaker. And apples release a lot of ethylene. And it caused the leaves to fall off the
I
stem.
thought that was a holly thing that just grew.
No, that's an apple that they stuck into the beaker. Have you ever heard the statement, one bad apple spoils the bunch?
Yes.
Yep.
It's because if you take an apple and it's a bad apple, that means it has a hole or something, like maybe a worm dug into it, and ethylene gas comes flying out of the hole, and it'll cause all the other apples to ripen real fast. Isn't that neat?
What about bananas? Why did they go bad?
Bananas, same way. They release ethylene, it causes other bananas. So you could do an experiment, say, if you wanted to test it, have a banana all by itself, and maybe count how fast it ripens, and put a banana and put a ripe banana in there with it that might release more ethylene and see if it ripens faster. That could be your experiment, Josie. Nanner experiment.
So should we put bananas in each row of our house so they don't go bad?
Maybe so. Maybe you should spread them out.
Well, apples, yeah.
I don't know.
Definitely made us frightened.
Okay, so here it shows, have you ever noticed how plants will lean toward the light?
Yeah.
So, again, if the sun was directly overhead, the distribution of growth hormones would be even. But if the sun is to one side, like it is in picture 2, the growth hormones are uneven. They're released on the side that's in the shade, that's away from the sun. And that causes the leaning toward the sun. And that ends up causing the plant to get more light. Would you like to see video footage?
Heck yeah.
We call it a plant movement like this a tropism. And specifically, this is called phototropism, moving towards the light. I think this is the better video here. These videos are fantastic.
I bet they are.
People love these videos.
Observe how these plants bend toward the light. Now let's see what happens when that light is turned out, and another light is turned on at the opposite side. This response of bending toward the light is called phototropism.
How cool is that?
Very.
Time-lapse
This
photography.
feels like Bill Nye.
Here we're going to observe the effects of a plant's response to gravity. This response is called geotropism. When a plant is turned from its normal growing position, the roots will again grow downward, exhibiting a positive response toward gravity. Roots tend to grow toward the center of the earth, whereas stems show a negative response and grow away from it.
How cool is that?
That's so cool.
Another video, not quite as cool, but still pretty cool. Do they still use the word cool, or is that an old person's word? It's neat. It's interesting that cool has survived, but rad did not make it.
Brad is still alive and well.
I don't believe that.
All right, here we go.
I say that. I say Brad.
A main characteristic of living things is their ability to respond to a stimulus. Plant stems respond to light by growing toward its source. This is called phototropism. Plant roots respond to gravity. A simple experiment shows that roots always respond to gravity by growing down. This is called gravitropism. Some plant movements don't seem related to a response. These are called nastic responses. For example, some climbing plants grow in a series of rhythmic movements that help the plant find a support up which it can grow.
That was like claymation.
So, how do you think a plant knows which way is down? The root goes down toward gravity. We call that positive gravitropism because it's going toward gravity. The stem goes up away from gravity. We call that negative gravitropism. It goes away from gravity. How do they know? How does the root know to go down? Any ideas?
Water is.
What's that?
That's where water is.
That's a good guess, but it's not the reason. Yes.
The growth hormones are heavy, so they go down.
That's a good guess too, and it's close. You're close to being
The
right.
root, the cells that are on the root tip are the newest.
Are the what?
The newest, like they're recently divided.
It actually has to do with this. There are cells. I'm going to draw some plant cells. And the plant cells have these little rocks in them. They're called amyloplasts. You don't have their book open? We have the same things in our ears. Did you know there's little rocks in your inner ears that always go down? No matter what position you're in, they always go down because they're pulled by gravity. And you can tell even if your eyes are closed, and even if you were, I don't know.
Buried in an avalanche and upside down.
Buried in an avalanche. That's good. You could tell which way is up and down by the way those rocks are pulled down. And the same thing happens. These little rocks, I can't remember their names, but it's in your reading. They're always pulled down. And so the cells, and they'll be down in each cell if that way's down. And so now the cells know which way is down. And what will happen is the cells that are on the bottom side, the hormones are released to the top side in the root. And so if the root was going this way, let's say here's a big root. That's the end of the root there. And these are just a close-up of the cells. Of course, it has a lot more cells than this. I have to make my drawing good. These roots at the top are the ones, the auxin is released to the top of the stem. So the cells will make auxin and push it this way. And so these are the cells at the top will have the auxin released. I shouldn't use red for auxin because I already draw these. But anyway, auxin, here's auxin hormone. Here we go. Auxin hormone is released into these cells because down is that way, the auxin hormone gets released to the top. And now these cells will elongate and the thing will bend down. The stem responds in exactly the opposite way. In the stem, the auxin is released to the bottom instead of to the top. And the auxin goes to the bottom, and the bottom cells expand, and the thing turns up. So stems and roots have exactly opposite ways in which they release auxin. Roots release auxin to the top cells, stems release auxin to the bottom cells. Is this freaking cool? Did you know plants are capable of all this?
Kinda.
Here's a plant that you'll probably like. It's called a sensitive mimosa. And if you touch them, they'll close their leaves. This is called a nastic response. A nastic response is a quick plant movement like this that isn't necessarily toward or away from anything. It's just a movement. And I got video footage of this one too. This is David Attenborough, my favorite movie maker.
Ferocious spines, painful stings, poisonous sap, near perfect disguise. Plants seem to have evolved every conceivable defense for their leaves, which by their very nature have to be spread wide to cast a light and are therefore very visible. But this plant, the sensitive mimosa, common beside tropical roadsides, has perhaps the most radical and certainly the most dramatic solution of all. One touch makes it fold its leaflets. Another tap, and it flops to the ground. How does that help? Well, watch how a hungry leaf-eating grasshopper gets on. Obviously, there's a splendid meal ahead. But before it even takes a bite, the meal vanishes.
We're just trying to have a snack.
Alright. Probably the most difficult thing to understand is this PFR photoperiodism. And let me go to the picture in your book here. Here it is. This picture from your book. And it talks about this pigment called phytochrome. Now, phytochrome is a pigment. A pigment is a colored molecule inside a plant. Chlorophyll is a pigment.
Varsity baseball, you are dismissed. Varsity baseball.
No baseball player?
Oh.
Funny.
Pete Rose. That was my favorite player when I was y'all's age. You ever heard of Pete Rose? He got banned from the hall for gambling on baseball.
Ooh.
All right, back to this. Try and pay attention here, Thomas. This is good stuff. So, how does a plant know when to flower? Have you ever noticed it's about right about this time? Springtime, it's getting warm, and the flowers come out. Does a plant flower because it's warm out?
No.
Actually, some do. But a lot of them don't. A lot of them aren't sensing the temperature. They're sensing how much light is in the day. I don't know if you've noticed, but since Christmas, it's got more and more light each day. It gets darker and darker later and later. Have you noticed that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's because of the way the Earth goes around the sun and the seasons and such. Take astronomy if you want to learn about that. It's great stuff. But we have this pigment in plants. It's a colored pigment that can absorb sunlight. It's called phytochrome, and it has two forms. The PR form is called phytochrome red, and it's an inactive form. And then there's this PFR form that's active. The PFR form is called phytochrome far red. It is basically this phytochrome molecule. When it gets hit by sunlight, and there we see red light is present in sunlight. When this phytochrome pigment gets hit by red light, it changes form. Think of how a protein can change shape. When the phytochrome red gets hit by the sunlight, it changes form and becomes active. It becomes what we call phytochrome far red. So here's phytochrome red, here's phytochrome far red. If it gets hit by sun, it changes into this far red form. And the far red is what causes the plant to flower in a lot of cases. It causes the cellular response, which is releasing hormones that cause some of your leaves to form flowers. Now, PFR has to be abundant in a high enough amount to cause the flowering response. In other words, if we have real short nights, you're not going to get enough PFR. The PFR level has to be past some amount. And the PFR level is low, and during the day it creeps up and creeps up as sun shines. But if it's a short day, it won't make it to this critical value, what we call a critical point. And at night it changes back. At night the PFR changes back to PR. See the darkness there? So every day over the winter, the PR will creep up and then go back. And then creep up and then go back. And as nights get longer, you get more PR. I'm sorry, not nights get longer. As days get longer, you're getting more PR, and finally it reaches a critical point. And that's enough to cause the flowering response to start. We call plants that flower when the days get longer, we call them long day plants.
That makes sense.
There are plants that do it just the opposite, and they flower when the days are short. And they would flower when the PFR levels are low, not high. And we call those short day flowers, short day plants. Is that pretty confusing? Well, so listen. Read the chapter. Could have a quiz on that when you get back. And we have all week next week to work on the science fair. Think about what you want to do as a project. It doesn't have to be this Nobel Prize winning project like Fritz Wendt did. Come up with something you can study. We got all sorts of variables. Come up with something you can measure. Run it for a couple of days. Write it up. It counts as a test grade. Anyone here have any low test grades that they want to average out?
Yeah.
You could make 100 on your project if you just do it and write it up well, and it could average out a bad test grade.
Nice.
I don't know.
Boogie.
Look,
Oh.
All right, well, it's out.